Hello and welcome to our cybersecurity risk assessment for the Post Office. Within this presentation, we're going to address the ability to protect information and information systems from cybersecurity threats. We're going to identify, address and prioritize risks to the information systems. Firstly, we're going to touch on the risk assessment process, what it is, why we do it, and what regulations are going to be followed. So firstly, the actual risk assessment process, why we do it, or what it is. It's a core task that needs to be undertaken by any and all organizations to address all physical and virtual risks involved within the organization. This presentation is going to focus on the cybersecurity aspect of risks and the risk assessment involved. So the types of the risk type coverage, so the types of assessments covered in this report will be standard CIA approach, confidentiality, integrity, availability, third-party security, which is third-party entities processing post office data, privacy impacts, which is third-party data processed by post office, and the business impact, which is the recovery time, recovery points, and mitigation. So regulations that we followed within this presentation will be the ISO standards. There's a short list here of the main ones that are going to be adhered to. Most importantly though is ISO 27005, and the most up-to-date revised version 27005-2022. We're going to be following this standard closely to be consistent and keep up to date with the most relevant regulations. So the overview of the process, or our risk assessment approach, will be to firstly identify the assets, the risks assets, both physical and virtual, for the post office. We're going to go over the assessment evaluation, and we're going to do a basic risk assessment matrix that's going to identify the risks, both physical and virtual, posed in the post office. Then we're going to go over the treatment and mitigation plan. So we're going to have a look at the risk assessment process, and then the matrix, and then plan how we're going to mitigate those risks. And then finally, just a short evaluation of our assessment, or our risk assessment, which will address positives and improvements needed to be made.
My name's Thomas, and I'll be going through the identification of information assets and risk identification in regards to cybersecurity, and we'll primarily be focusing on the report we have done on the Royal Mail / the Post Office. Before we can get into the report on the Post Office and their assets, we first have to have a look at what is an asset. So as you can see on the slide, an asset is an item of property usually owned by a person or company, regarded as having value and available to meet debts, commitments, or legacies. So when many people think of an asset, they think of something tangible. That's not always necessarily the case. For example, you could have something tangible like a server, a PC, but then you have other things like a post office van. You could have things such as an IP. That would all be considered assets. So let's have a look at the post office assets. So on the screen now you can see some examples. Please feel free to have a look at the list. So let's look at the main ones. So we've got post. That's obviously an asset. While technically it's not the post offices, when it's in their property, that's an asset to them. Post office vans, obviously an asset used to deliver post every day. We've got cash machines. Cash machines, obviously, that's a big thing for the post office these days, especially given how banks are slowly going away. We've got servers, which are used to run things like the post office system. We've got employee data. We've got address data, company data. All of this is big and would be considered part of the post office assets. So obviously all these assets are great and they allowed the post system to run mostly well. However, there are risks attached to assets. For example, card machines can be tampered with so that when an unexpected customer comes along, puts their card in, all their details are stripped and they could lose thousands of pounds. Post office vans can be vandalised. The post office system that runs on the server can be DDoSed. It can have ransomware on it. There are risks attached to all of this, unfortunately. So to circumvent these risks, we have to do a risk identification. And that's the case of using the risk assessment matrix and the CIA triangle, which Rodri tapped onto earlier. So it's the case of looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability for a risk in a specific system, and then basically weighing up how high of a value a risk is it, how likely is it to happen, and if it is to happen, how bad would the outcome be. So, for example, something like someone tampering with a card machine. It's not incredibly unlikely, but it's not very likely. You can still hear about it in the news. But if that happens, that's a massive issue because of the potential loss an expected customer to have. So we've gone ahead and done the risk identification on all the assets listed so far in an Excel document.
Yeah, when we're talking about risk assessment and evaluation in the post office, there are some certain steps for which to when the risk assessment is about to get the safety and security of employees, customers, mail, and other things within the environment of the post office. By doing this, we need to first of all identify the hazards in the environment. In order to identify the hazard, we need to conduct a thorough inspection of the post office premises to identify potential hazards. This could include falls, slippery, or even mismanagement of people's mail or theft as well. When we're able to identify those hazards, then we assess the risks on those hazards are identified. We assess the level of the risk associated with each and every of the hazard. Then, for example, if it's slippery or falls on the wet floors, we might know how the risk is in what causes this, the risk attached to all those very hazards we've identified. By so doing, then we have to prioritize the risk involved because some risk needs to be given more attention than the others. So we need to prioritize, but not all the risk are not equal. So we need to prioritize the risk, then to be able to handle them one after the other with our scale of preferences as well. Yeah, we've prioritized the risk, so we have to implement some control measures. We have to develop some control measures to reduce or eliminate those identified risks. Employ some strategies that can improve the safety protocols by providing maybe training to employees and on proper lifting on ways to handle people's mail and all the rest of them. We have to equally also regularly be monitoring and review those risks with equally implemented controls on to know if there is proper effectiveness of our implementation controls. We have to review those risk assessments to account for if there is changes in the workplace environment. At the same time, we have to involve all the employees in the post office because they are the ones that are subjected to those risks most. So they have to help us to identify those risks if there is any implementations of the effort we've made to identify or controls on those risks. So at the workplace, you have to report back to and encourage them to report any safety concerns about the incident anytime it happens again. We have to ensure there is a total compliance by every employee in the safety and the security regulations set forth by the local authorities. We have to also make sure there is emergency preparedness to develop regular updates on emergency response plans to handle various scenarios such as maybe fire outbreak, natural disaster, or security breaches. So we have to conduct some kind of training sessions to ensure that all the employees around are prepared to respond effectively in any case of emergency at all time.
Hello, I'll be talking about risk treatment plan for a post office. Okay, on risk treatment plan means like identifying the potential risk, and the impact and the implementation measures to mitigate and manage the risk. Okay, some of the risk treatment plan are as follows. We have the risk identification. That means what we have to identify our document or potential cybersecurity risks that the post office might face, and we have the risk assessment, and we also have prioritization, which is identifying the risks based on their potential impact and likelihood. Focus on addressing high impact and high likelihood risk first. Okay, we also have the mitigation strategy, which is developing and implement specific strategy to mitigate each risk. This include, implementing robust email security measure, regular updating, we have on implementing fireworks, conducting regular security awareness training. Okay, now we also have incident response plan, which is developing a comprehensive incident response plan that outlines the step to be taken in the event of cybersecurity incident. This should include role and responsibility, communication protocol, and procedures for investigation and mitigation incident. We have a regular testing and training. There must be regular training for staff, conducting regular cybersecurity drill and exercises to test the effectiveness of the risk treatment plan. This includes stimulation, phishing exercise, Okay, we have on vendor risk management. Okay, this we can say this means like if the post office are dealing with the third party must like strictly adhere with the policy, you know, of the organization. We have this physical security measures. This implies that physical security measures to be protect the post office infrastructure and some sensitive information. That means some information are documented paperly, they are just on paper. Okay, we have regulation compliance. We ensure the risk treatment plan align with the relevant security regulation and standard application to the post office service. We have continue monitoring and implement. Okay, this establish a continuous monitoring process to track change in the threat landscape and the effectiveness of the risk treatment plan. Regular update and improve the plan based on now inside and the threat. Thank you.
We're talking about the pros and cons of risk assessment. When we're talking about the pros, which is the advantages, we're talking about it helps us to identify the potential risk of the area. It still helps us to prioritize the risks and to know the ones how to tackle them and the ones we have to pay more attention and concentration on. It still helps us to make some decisions on how to provide some kind of to know the valuables inside on the risk. It still helps the employees on their compliance in the rules and regulation of the local authority and still the administration authority as well. It still helps us to get some allocations, optimize some allocation resource, focusing on the managing of most significant risks at first sight. At first, yeah. Yeah, when we talk about the advantage, which is the cons, we still talk about disadvantages. There are many disadvantages on risk assessment. There are many challenges in risk assessment. Because sometimes it might be subjected to maybe you might get some personal influence on it that makes the data or the assessment bias, leading to giving us inconsistent results. There can be complicity of the maybe assessment and other things that might require much time and the resources that might take a lot from the company that might result to maybe not giving us or completing the risk as inaccurate as well. Risk assessment might always not be accurate depending on the expertise that handles it. The outcome might equally give us wrong results that might lead to maybe negating wrong assumptions. So